For this last part of the tutorial, part 3, we're just going to make a Windows service host. So before we had a console app host, and now we're going to find this package here, which is a little open source package. It's a neat little package, which gives us all the Windows API calls and wraps them up into some nice .NETCore classes. So we'll add that package to our Windows service host, and then we'll add a class for the Windows service. We're just going to call it service host. And that will inherit from the Win32 interface provided by the same package. So there we're looking for an iWin32 service. And we'll just implement that quickly. We'll simplify that first, of course, add the using. Now we're going to implement the interface. We'll give it a service name. We could use reflection to pull out the name of the DLL, for instance, but for now we're just going to keep it simple once again. And then in our start method, we're going to use the same code that we used in the other host, and the only change we're going to make is we're going to change that host.run to host.start. So that's a non-blocking method that'll start the host up and return straight up as soon as the host is started. So we're going to add the iWebHost as a private member variable. The reason for this is because now we're separating the startup and shutdown. So you can see here we've added the start method, and then in the stop method we will dispose of the host. We'll add a question mark to say if it's null, don't do it, and we will make the host equal null. So this will just mean that if stop's called multiple times, we won't call dispose on that multiple times by accident. Alright, now we'll head over to the Windows service itself. We'll now head over to the program. We create an instance of the service host, and then we create a Win32 host from the package and pass in our host to it. Now this is fine. However, this will be difficult to debug because we'll need to actually connect to the Windows service to debug it. The problem with debugging that is it means you can't catch startup errors very easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in an if statement and say, actually, if a debugger is attached, we're just going to run it by running the start directly, pausing until we get a enter or return line on the console, and then we'll run the stop method. This makes it much easier to debug our Windows service without having to actually start the service, attach to it, stop the service, etc. So now we'll just make it run as a normal console app, but with exactly the same code that will run in the Windows service. Just pass null in there. We're not using any of the parameters that we pass in, so we don't need to pass anything through. We could if we want to, and if we start passing parameters through later, then we'll pass those through at the same time. And we'll just write a line just to say that we've started up. And if you push any key, it will stop the service. Actually, you'll have to push enter, so I might go back and change that. But for now, that will do. We can run in the debugger, and we should just see that start up as per normal. We'll change the port to 5001 because our other application is running on 5000. We'll discuss ports and how to manage multiple ports later for multiple instances. But you can see there it's started up. Open up the browser, go to port 5001, same call as we were using before, and that's worked with a 200. So that's excellent. Now we're going to head over to the command prompt using conemu again, and we're going to start a command prompt up as administrator. The reason we need elevation is because we're going to create a service, and a service requires an elevated command prompt. So we'll just head over to the folder, and you can see here we've got a bin folder, and in there debug, and then we should have a .NetCore app 1 folder. So we'll go in there just so we've got all the paths, and we'll use SC and then create, and then we'll give it the service name that's going to come up, and then we'll give it a display name. So we'll basically use the same thing, but we'll put some spacing in it, make it look a little nicer. And finally, we're going to give it the command that it's going to run. Now we're going to use C program files, and then .NET, and then .NET.exe, and then we're going to pass in our DLL. Now this means that it requires .NET installed on the machine and the correct version of .NET that we're using. Later on we'll look at publishing our application as a standalone application, so you don't need .NET installed on the machine at all. But for now, this will also make it easier for debugging, because every time we build, that DLL will change. It will mean that when we come to build, we'll need to stop the service if we have it running, otherwise the file will be locked. Now we should be able to see the service in here. And we can, and it runs, and we can head on over and check that that page loads again, and correct, we've got a 200. So that's it, a service host and a console host all done. Thanks for watching. This is the last part of this tutorial. The next tutorial, we'll look at loading some basic data out of a database, using Dapper, and hosting it inside Windows containers.